Hi guys, welcome to September's Dispatches, and quite a colourful and eclectic bunch of releases they are too. So quite a lot to tell you about, so let's get started. Let's go right to the beginning, and up here some of you will be familiar with our Mogadishu display, and that of course means more US Army Rangers from our new Black Hawk Down series, and it's quite a bunch as well. We've got 10 figures divided basically into 4 two-man sets and 2 singles that covers lots of the action that you've seen from our initial release. So we're continuing that theme. So let's begin with the guy right at the very end here, and that's the US Army Ranger with the SAW 249. The SAW was the squad automatic weapon that was adopted by the US Armed Forces in 1984, and it was based on the original design of the FN Fabrique Nationale, the Belgium arms company, and their Minimi machine gun, light machine gun I should say. Basically, the US Armed Forces, like many armed forces around the world, realized that they really needed a squad automatic weapon that had all the abilities of a machine gun, but the versatility and portability of an assault rifle. And in this case, the Minimi, or the SAW, was designed around the 5.56 millimeter or 5.56 caliber round that was already in use for the M16A2 assault rifle. Became very popular with the US Armed Forces, and in fact has been adopted by many other armed forces all over the world. So the guy you see right at the end has got the strap on the weapon over his shoulder, so he's firing it from the hip, and that's single figure. Then we've got the first of our two-man sets, which is the radio guy here. So one kneeling ranger on his personal radio, and backing him up and giving him cover is his buddy standing up next to him with the M16A2. Great little set, and again you've seen that featured in some of our other photographs that have been released on the Black Hawk Down series. In front of those guys is another two-man set, and we're calling that Advance to Contact. And again, that's using the battlefield technique of one guy covering while another guy rushes forward or moves to a new position. Change over from time to time, so that as they move forward, one will be covering, one will be moving forward, and vice versa. Then we come to another two-man team, and this is the two guys down the front, and this is the SAW squad automatic weapon team, where you've got the gunner lying prone and his number 2 lying, providing backup, also lying prone with his M16A2. Very useful little set. Last of the two-man sets is this guy here. Leave no man behind, or specifically leave no ranger behind, and that's part of the ranger creed. So we've got one guy carrying his wounded buddy over his shoulders in what's called the fireman carry, but he's still holding on to his M16A2, and with his other hand having a tight grip on his buddy. And the last of the series here is single figure, and it's a guy at the back here looking towards the rear, so that these guys have got a 360 degree cover of their position. So 10 new figures, but again something very different, not very different, but tying in with what we've done before, but all action. Really useful figures. Now I should add here that of course what's missing is our Humvees. Now the Humvees, which you've seen again in previous photographs, they're coming out in October, and that'll be the 2 Humvees with the 2 different machine gunners, including drivers for each vehicle. So each Humvee will come with 2 figures, individual gunner in the top of the cabin, and the driver inside. So look out for those in October, but in the meantime you can at least build up your Ranger force with these. And I should say, to give you a heads up, that I've already approved the masters of the what we're calling the rescue, and that was the scene again, if you've seen the movie or read the book, where one of the Black Hawk helicopters that was shot down, 2 Special Forces Delta guys jumped in to try to rescue whoever had survived the crash, and sadly there was only one guy survived the crash. That was the pilot, Mike Durant. So when the 2 Special Forces guys got there, they literally had to fight off hundreds of Somali militiamen that were closing in on that area. They put up a valiant fight. Very sadly, both men lost their lives. Both Delta Force guys lost their lives in trying to rescue, and both were in fact awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Mike Durant, the wounded pilot, actually was captured and amazingly survived, but the 2 other guys did not. So that'll be a future set coming out, and we've got some other ideas in the pipeline already, which some of you may have seen some of the sketches of, some Somali militiamen, but also some more Rangers. So you can look out for those in the coming months. So we'll leave Somalia for a minute. And again, as I've said in the actual post that we're putting out on the dispatches, we move from the sort of dust-covered camouflage of elite soldiers here to another elite regiment elsewhere in the world, and that's, if you look right over here, we've got a figure of the Irish Guards, and the Irish Guards Mascot, to be more precise. Now, of all the Guards regiments, there are 5 Guards regiments: Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards that we featured a lot of, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and the Welsh Guards. Now, the Irish Guards were actually founded in 1900, and it was on the explicit orders of Queen Victoria that she wanted a foot guards regiment made up of Irishmen in appreciation of their loyal service to Queen and country in the Second Boer War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902. And one of the things, after the regiment was formed, it was suggested to them by no less auspicious an organisation than the Irish Wolfhound Club that perhaps they should have a mascot. And they very kindly donated to the regiment an Irish wolfhound that would be attached to the regiment and would appear on special occasions and military parades. And the first wolfhound that was donated to the regiment was a wolfhound called Brian Boru, which is basically the name of an ancient Irish king. And every decade or so since that time, an Irish wolfhound has been presented to the regiment. Now, the latest mascot goes by the name of Seamus, and that's what we've depicted here. So Seamus was given to the regiment in, I believe, 2020 by the Irish Wolfhound Club, and part of the tradition is that the wolfhound is always looked after by its handler, who comes from the regimental drums. So it's a regimental drummer takes command of Seamus, and in the past every other wolfhound that's been the mascot. And not only does he look after it, but he actually lives with the dog, or the dog lives with him and his family, but comes out on special occasions and parades. So we've got Seamus, the wolfhound, and his handler. Now, while we're still on things like that, now, I mentioned the fact that the Guards regiments look after the British monarch. That's part of their ceremonial duties, to protect the monarch. We've actually got a figure of another British monarch, King Edward VII. Now, Edward VII basically ruled from, I think it was 1902 to 1910. Not a particularly long reign. In fact, it might have been 1901 to 1910. But he has a distinction of being the longest ever serving heir to the throne. His mother was Queen Victoria, and Edward himself was born in the 1840s. So he came to the throne, as I say, in 1901, I think his coronation was actually in 1902. And we have him dressed in his ceremonial uniform of a Field Marshal of the British Army, and he's also wearing his coronation cape, which is edged with ermine. Very colourful figure. And in fact, Edward himself was a fairly colourful figure. For many years, having not a lot to do, he lived a very leisurely life of going to the racetrack, going to the theatre. He was a great lover of hunting, fishing, and shooting. And his other great passion, if you can call it that, was, shall we say, being attached to ladies of dubious virtue. He had several mistresses over that period, although he was married as well, but that's another story. However, after he came to the throne, he actually seemed to become a lot more sensible, and he was very much involved with the modernisation of the Royal Navy in those years before the First World War. And not just the Navy, but he took a great interest in the British Army. And the Army itself, after the Boer War, many lessons had been learned, and he was involved in promoting the modernisation of the Army. You could say almost just in time for the First World War. So we decided to do a figure of him, and it's a great little add-on to our Royal series. So have a closer look at it and check it out. By the way, the two little figures that you see presenting arms at the front of the display are actually a pair of our Coldstream Guards that are already available. Now, let's go from one kind of royalty almost to another, and that's these four guys here. Now, anybody that certainly of my generation will know that represents these four lads from Liverpool who literally changed the world. Again, growing up as a teenager in the 1960s, it was a very exciting decade to be a teenager, and a lot of that was because of these John, Paul, George and Ringo, four working class guys from Liverpool in England who literally changed the world. They changed how teenagers looked, what they wore, what they sounded like, the music, obviously. It was just an amazing time to be a teenager, and it was an amazing time in the UK. Everything was changing. Movies were changing, television was changing, fashion was changing, and you really felt at that time it was the centre of the world. And obviously for our friends in America, they'll recognise the fact that when the Beatles came to America, they changed everything there. And one of the greatest changes, as I mentioned, was the music itself. And it's amazing, it's incredible to see the difference in the Beatles' own music from when they first began being noticed and being recorded in 1962-63, that within 5 years, 1967, they brought out this incredible album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was like nothing that no one had ever seen or heard before. All the songs were amazingly original, and it was just gobsmacked. The image that they brought forth, the sound that they brought forth. So, having been a Beatles fan all these years, and I'm proud to say I still am, I actually got to see them play in one of the last British concerts before they stopped playing live anywhere, and that was back in Glasgow. And I've got to tell you, my seat cost all of 8 and 6pence in old British money, which in American money was probably about $1.20 or something, and that was the second most expensive seat. The unfortunate thing was you couldn't hear a thing. The screams were so loud and horrendous that the music itself was lost. And I think that was one of the reasons why they themselves decided that they wanted to stay in the recording studio and make better music, make more original music that could be heard in the privacy of your own home. So as a tribute to these four amazing men, I've brought this little set out, and just for curiosity, many years ago, King and Country brought another little set of Sgt. Pepper Beatles out that are almost impossible to find on the secondary market. So many people have requested this, and I really felt I wanted myself to make a tribute to an important part of my life, and maybe an important part of a few other people's lives as well. So that's that. 4 figures plus the iconic drum and the floral arrangement in front of the Beatles that you can see on the front cover of the original album. So we'll move from the 1960s to another important time in British history, and that was the summer of 1940. Now again, as you know, K&C has produced many Royal Air Force figures and Royal Air Force aircraft, Spitfires and Hurricanes predominantly, which are the 2 aircraft that took part in the Battle of Britain. Of course, that's what won the battle, but people often forget what went on behind the scenes. And one of the most important things that helped us win that battle were not just the pilots and the aircraft, although that was vitally important, and the ground crews as well, but the people behind the scenes for those guys. And that was the operations rooms that were spread throughout RAF Fighter Command. And that was because each of the areas of the UK at that time were divided into different groups, and different groups were responsible for the airfields in that particular sector and the squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes that flew from those airfields. And these operation rooms were linked to a chain of defences, not just like radar that was on the coasts of the UK that could plot the German aircraft that were heading towards Britain on the different days of the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain actually lasted for 4 months, from July to October 1940. Anyway, these chain of radar stations would pick up the signals of the incoming German forces, and that would then be passed to the operations room. At the same time, there was observer posts all along the coasts of Britain, where guys with binoculars that were looking up into the sky to see where these formations were heading towards, and they would also report to the operations room. In the operations room itself would be these gigantic map tables, and they would be staffed by WAAFs, which are WAAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the female branch of the Royal Air Force. And these women would be charged with moving different markers across this huge map, pointing to where the enemy aircraft were and which direction they were going in, and they would then report back to maybe a senior NCO or flight sergeant standing here, and other officers who were on telephones who would contact the airfields nearest to where the German attacks were heading or were coming to. And that would give the squadrons that were based in different airfields time to get in the air and prepare to meet the enemy aircraft. Now, not only would they do that, but behind them you'll see this board here, and this was an illuminated board with each of the different airfields that would be in a particular group and each of the squadrons that would be on each airfield. And this illuminated board would tell these people involved which squadrons were available to take to the air, which squadrons perhaps had just landed and were refueling and rearming and getting ready for readiness to get back in. And that they could plot everything, where the Germans were heading, how strong the enemy opposition was, and what defensive forces were available to combat them. Now you'll see two little figures at the end here, and that's an add-on set. And the male officer here, very senior male officer, is Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, who was the man in command of RAF Fighter Command. And next to him is a section officer. Section officer was the female equivalent in the WAFs of a Royal Air Force flying officer. It was kind of like a second lieutenant, or maybe even a lieutenant. And she would be in charge of the females that were WAFs that were manning the table. So this complete set here is the table, the stand, the 5 figures that are manning the table, and if you look closely you'll see there's little markers that can be moved all over the table, and these little sticks, which were like a croupier style pushing stick to put the markers into position so that they could plan what was going to come next, and obviously the flying officer, flight sergeant in charge. So that's one set, and it includes the tote board in the background, and the other little 2-figure set is the add-on set of Air Chief Marshal Dowding and the section officer. Great little Battle of Britain set. I should say, by the way, we're at work, and I'll be releasing photographs soon of the first of our brand new Hawker Hurricane fighters that's coming out, but that's another story. Now our final release is, the only place I could find to put them is 2 Apache Warriors. Now we've the 2 that I've got here are not the 2 that we're actually bringing out, so you'll see that don't know, that must have been my fault, but the 2 Apache Warriors, and you'll get a closer look at those 2 when we do the close-ups coming up. But in the meantime, I've spoken long enough. Desperately need something to drink, so I'll leave it at that, but hope there's something that you'll like, and keep those emails coming in with suggestions, ideas and comments. We always appreciate them. But in the meantime, that's September for you. Enjoy.